having a guy like you with all the experience, I love to be able to take this experience and share it to the audience, so you can get a glimpse in the world of, kind of the things you went through, especially for some of the follow-on questions I'll have. But is there a time on your deployments and combat that you could share that really just emphasizes what combat was like?
What combat is like? I think the best way I could probably explain what that is when you stop feeling alive and you become like you become robot to the task at hand, because you have ambition, you have energy, you have like a thrive about you. But when that starts to get dismantled, either by casualties, loss of life, seeing the horrors of, what it is. None of my deployments were like, oh bro, that was so fun. None of them were ever fun. I was scared shitless almost every time.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I didn't perform. I could still be scared. I did one jiu-jitsu competition. I was terrified. I still did it.
Yeah.
But once you start seeing like what it does to your soul. For instance, when I was 18 years old and the chaplain kept on coming every week to our stronghold for another sigil, that gets old.
Yeah.
And you ever watched Band of Brothers when they start meeting like the new guys and they're like, I'm not even get to know you because you're going to be dead?
Yeah.
Well, I saw Band of Brothers before I went and I'm like, that's not real. So real. And I don't know, I started to see, instead of seeing like casualties, I started seeing dads and brothers and sons getting killed. And so the experience of combat to me is like, I don't know, you can show up all you want to, but you're going to pay a price in some capacity. And it might not show up now, it might not even show up as a bad dream, PTSD, but it's going to show up in some form of you, because you cannot perform these tasks and go back to functioning normal. It's not realistic.
Yeah, there's
most people
physical, mental, or spiritual consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people are okay with themselves taking pain, but there's more emotional tied to something else of like that's outside of you, like a friend or a comrade or like a source, like something that you have a connection, someone you have a connection with, that humanized aspect.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Everyone glorifies combat. I want to go, and I said shit like that too. When I was young and naive, I didn't know.
Sure.
But when you hang out with men and their families back in America, and you're like breaking bread with them, and then they don't come home with you, for me, I started to question like everything, And so I say, to explain what combat is like, it's what's it like to not be you.
Yeah, I can relate a lot to that. I remember Foster Harrington was killed in 2004. We had been serving together 10 years at that point. He served at my wedding. He was there when my kids were born. Mark Terrell, we were all real close friends. And when he was killed, this is the first loss I had like that. And I remember just being so angry and wanting to just be like climbing a hole and grieve. But I had to operate that night. And so that I think something happens with that, the fact that you can't grieve, you start getting this callousness and like you lack empathy, you can't feel. And now you have to deploy, come back home, go back and forth. If you're a husband, if you're a parent, like that callousness just stays, you can't turn it off. And so that was a big transition piece for me. I started feeling like I couldn't feel, like I couldn't feel, like a numbness.
I'm 39 now. I've been out since 2018. And honestly, not until the end of last year could I say I actually have empathy. I found myself, even after being out, 7-ish years now, like still battling with that. But because not understanding that every time I showed up in that environment, I had to give a part of me away to go play that game, which I'm told I would do it 1,000 lifetimes over. Well, I don't regret nothing.
Sure.
Right. However, still actively working on myself through that, finding out that I had this gap of empathy where I care, but I don't care. And I can just shut you off. That's not a good trait to be a dad or a husband, business partner, entrepreneur, and so I didn't realize that my actions from 18 to 33, I'd still be dealing with 6 years later, trying to really connect the gaps of not who I was before I joined, because I was a punk, but who am I now after all these pieces have kind of fallen into place, and empathy was a really big part of that.
Yeah, there's got to be, I believe there has to be an intentionality to reset that, because for me, and it's my perspective, I'm a really strong believer. I'm a Christian. During my time, I wouldn't say I was atheist. I was probably agnostic at that time, because I had a really hard time reconciling what was happening there and how that could happen in a universe where there was a God, right? So
Right.
I really had a hard time with that. However, I've reconciled all that now very, very clearly for myself. But there was just a point to realizing, like, I believe I was created, but I don't believe that God ever created us to see or do the things that we see or do. I believe it's necessary for warriors to go stand up against evil, and for good men to kill evil, as necessary for us to defend our nation, for us to defend people around the world that can't defend themselves. But we're never intended to do that. And so since we're never created intended to do that, there's consequences physically through death, injuries, mentally, spiritually. I believe those consequences. And so if there's an intentionality behind reconciling those things, there's long-term consequences that drag out and destroys everyone around you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the reintegration of like war to warrior
Yeah.
has been lost for decades. I mean, we look at old like native tribes or other tribes, whether they did plant medicine or not, but they had they medicine man, medicine woman, they sat around a fire, they had fellowship, right? They worked through things to get them back and reintegrated back into the community, where we do the opposite. We have those things, but we relied on the warrior to want to get the help to reintegrate back into the community. Meanwhile, the people in the community are like, why are you weird? Why aren't you over here? And there's just like this weird, there's like a kink in the system, right? Where we made it, you're weak if you come back from war and you're hurt or you're broken or you're going through stuff. You're so weak that if you ever tell anyone, you run the chance of losing your job, your clearance, your gun, everything.
Yeah.
And you become so weak, you create stigmas that aren't even real, and that is generational, right? It's like the scarcity that your parents may have had, that maybe you had. Like, I know, there was scarcity in my family's family, so my parents had it, then I had it growing up until I worked on that, right? It just trauma bonds, and it passes on to generation. And most of our mentors and leaders taught us how either they were taught or they realized how I was taught wasn't the best way. So here's how I want to bring in my individuality to enhance my leadership. But that's not a common virtue also, because individuality and thought processes it's not really invoked in the service. And I can only speak of the Marines, but I can only imagine across the DOD, it's not,
You explain it really well. I think, one, you have family trauma bonds, the generational things, but you also have the generational things that exist inside the military family, the unit, the community. I mean, when I got to the command that I deployed at, there was a, incident that happened early on in Afghanistan where, Roberts, fell out of the back of a helicopter trying to save a crew chief and was I wasn't there, so I don't know the complete story, but fought the Taliban till the end, was brutally murdered. They killed him in a horrific way, and the command was like, "That's the rules we're playing, like game on," and it created a culture of like this kind of war culture and this mindset that went on from generations to people that weren't even involved in an incident. Again, I wasn't there. But even though I wasn't there and part of that, I was infected by that mentality,
right,
and passed it on to other people. And I think that's very much after 20 plus years in war, it infected the culture of our units in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time too, I really don't know. I don't. If we look at history, were there long conflicts? Absolutely. But were there long conflicts that were invoked for the reasons they're invoked today? So already you have a psychological operation there. You already have, this warrior calling, which will never rid from humans, period, right?
Sure.
And then you have an opportunity, you have a cause for them to go serve. But then it's like, how do you really, there is no cookie cutter way for warriors to return home from war. That's proven. It must start at a young age, and it must start through communication, and it must start through, having the actioner take action for themselves if they see any of these signs or symptoms, without prosecution or without being belittled or without losing your job. Like if that stigma was recreated, I think we see a lot more men and women come back home. Because here's another fun thing. Like, people think that, I didn't go to war. That doesn't mean you don't have TBIs.
Sure.
If you've ever thrown a grenade in training, if you've ever shot guns loud without ear pro, which every person in the military, dude or male or dude or female, has done this, you create these ripple effects inside your brain. And, I've been heavily into TBI stuff and brain health since I've been out, because I retired early at 15 and a half years because my brain was shutting down. And so that's how I found myself out of the Marine Corps 4.5 years early. And what I'm noticing more now as I've educated myself and been exposed to things is like all these signs and symptoms of PTSD, they're coming out of people that didn't have the same experiences. Therefore, the chances of them actually speaking up are super slim because they already feel inferior and not like they're worthy of it. But what they don't realize is that TBIs can give us the same effects of those horrible traumatic experiences, right? It doesn't matter how you broke your leg. If you broke your leg skiing and I broke my leg free falling, what unites us is the pain that our legs are broken, right? It doesn't matter how you did it. And I think the war culture, we like, oh, well, I haven't been shot, so I don't rate a VA benefit, or I have my legs. There's nothing wrong with me, bro.
Yeah.
Like, dude, I saw you slip and fall outside with a machine gun in your hand, walking to the armory. Do you not think that did anything to your brain? But we're so programmed, we don't even see that our daily lives influence, the outcomes of our careers, not just these traumatic experiences. And that is a hard culture shift to get guys, especially guys, to want to stay ahead of their health and look at the longevity purposes, not just the short-term shotgun blasting,
Right.
Pre-deployment health assessments. No, I don't drink beer. Yes, I eat 12 cans of green beans a day. Because if you drink one beer and 1 cup a week of green vegetables, you're an alcoholic and you're obese. You know, so like, you're like, oh, what? Okay, so I do none of this. Now I am clear bill of health. They care so much about me, they took my word on it. You know what I'm saying? That makes no sense. They care so much about me, they took my word on it.
Yeah.
That's not care.
That's not care. No.
That's an invitation for you to survive.
Because the worst case scenarios are the ones that are going to be in isolation, or many of them.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have too. I mean, we've seen them on both spectrums, right?
Yeah.
You never know who's going to crack. You never know who's at their wits end. I tell guys this. I remember when I went to sniper school as a student, day one, you do like your PFT, your physical fitness test, and you do land navigation. And I was there with half my class was recon guys. I was still a guy from sniper platoon in the infantry. Half the recon guys failed. And those guys are always in the bush, always doing land nav, always doing these things. But I'm like, how did I pass and they didn't pass this bread and butter of their world? Well, the same thing goes into our life. Like, oh man, that person's such a stud. Wait, why did that person kill themselves? Well, because we're looking at the wrong metrics. We're giving credit to the wrong things, right? Like,
Yeah.
But it's just this cycle, this vortex of like, it's sad. And the only way I think we truly change it is by talking about it more. It's not telling guys to get help. That does not work.
Right.
You might as well say Jesus Christ, PTSD, brain health. Nobody cares about that stuff. Life insurance. Nobody cares. So if you say those terms, and we know that in history, it pushes people away. How do you bring them in? How do you bring someone in to actually want to be a better, more capable warrior who's the man, father, husband, or woman, mother, wife, spouse? How do you make these warriors want to truly embody what a warrior is? Not this facade of like, I'm badass in war, but I'm a Molotov cocktail in peacetime.
Yeah.
That's instability, and that's a central nervous system issue. And there's a lot of underlining things that should be addressed. But how do we get guys and girls to want to do that stuff? And to me, that's a really big plague that we still have, because guys are still suffering. Humans are still suffering, and it's totally cool to suffer. It's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with you. But we created this white knight, stoicism, like suck it up mentality. And it really deters people, especially who already feel inferior to a certain way, which I don't know about you, bro.
Yeah.
But there's only a small percentage of people who to ever serve in the U.S. military. And the fact that service members feel like I didn't do enough.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't do anything. Like, you
Raised your hand.
what world do you live in?
Yeah. 0.5% of the U.S. population.
Half
serves.
a percent.
Yeah.
Half of a percent.
Yeah.
Half of a percent, and you're not good enough.
Yeah.
There is no America without you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No matter what you believe with the wars, but at the end of the day, if you have no security, no safety measures, you are a sitting target, and if you look at history and you have resources, you're gonna get dominated. One or two ways: infiltrated, or attacked. Simple as that.
Right.
So your point of a percent, half a percent,
Yeah.
I think is pretty freaking awesome.
Everyone that serves, wears uniform, should be proud of, and regardless of what their job was.
But
by the way,
I have even challenged to take it outside the military. Like, be proud of serving your military country. How about be proud of, you said you were going to do something that you weren't guaranteed nothing, and you signed up and you did that, right? You can't quit like college. It's not like a job.
Right.
You're stuck for 4 years. You're voluntarily submitting yourself to an institution that you've given your mind, body, and your spirit to for the next 4 years plus, and you can't do anything about it. No other job like that exists.
It's a very serious commitment
but people don't give themselves credit for that.
Yeah.
They're like, well, I was just a motor T guy. I'm like, bro, motor T guys and cooks were killing enemy combatants alongside me in Fallujah. Engineers, female engineers. I've been in gunfights with females. I've been in gunfights with cooks. I've been in gunfights with chaplains, bro. I've done it all with these people.
Yeah.
And never once they say, this is my job description. Because war does not discriminate. But yet I only was a motor T guy. I only did admin. Like, bro, my job can't function or exist without you.
Yeah.
So what in our system, where does it feel that you are just subservient?
That's one beautiful thing that comes out of 2 decades of combat, is you realize how important every job is in every corner of the military and how it all works together for the team effort, the common good.
Dude, I tell people all the time, I'm like, bro, if your job wasn't important, it wouldn't exist. The military is not a handout organization. They take from you almost everything, right? Everything they take from you. So what makes you think they're going to create a job that serves no purpose and plug your ass into it? That doesn't make sense.
No.
But it's this comparison thing, right?
Yeah.
Then you have to ask yourself, if you feel inferior, why didn't you try? Why didn't you go? You had the strength and courage to enlist or commission. If you wanted more, why didn't you go more? So imagine them spending 4 years not doing those things, feeling subhuman for whatever reason, right? Because the institution is a full stigma. And then they get out. How do you think they're going to integrate into the civilian world? How do you think they're going to look at their children, their wife, or their husband, depending on what, sex they are, right? It's just, it's crazy how the ripple effect continues on until you change it.
I'm super proud that Smith & Wesson Firearms is a supporter of this show. I have been shooting Smith & Wesson Firearms since I was a kid. This is one of America's most patriotic companies that has been around 170 years. The Resilient Show is honored to partner with Smith & Wesson. I personally use Smith & Wesson Firearms every day for my everyday carry. I keep Smith & Wesson Firearms in my home for my home defense. When I'm out on the range practicing, it is a Smith & Wesson at the end of my grip. So check them out, and I hope you join me in carrying one of America's most iconic firearms.